So we're going to start this morning. Thank you, Sean, for the introductions. I think this will be a very interesting session here because we really want it to be interactive. We're going to bring up topics. We're going to bring up things that, from both a manufacturer and a distributor perspective, that I think will be interesting to listen to as we go through our spa journeys. So with that, we've met Gareth, and you know who I am now. So we're here to help you with any questions that we have. So please feel free to interrupt as we're going through things. So today we're going to talk about what we call the pillars of SPA management. So when we talk about pillars, I guess it's kind of like the areas of SPAs that we all have in a process, and that process can be painful, whether it be you're requesting and approving of spas. We're going to use spas, by the way. They're called claim backs. They're called, ship and debits. So please know we'll just use spas during. Is that okay with you? Now you use a different.
Slip up a little bit.
Yeah, okay. You can use your word. What's your word today?
It's claim backs.
Claim backs.
Claim backs. Yeah.
All right. So if we say claim backs or spas, it's one and the same. But then not only do we have a process to request and approve a spa, but then it's, of course, once it's in the system, your business systems of some sort, there's the maintenance of the spa, the renewals, the pricing, all of that has to go into it. And then, of course, we get to the point where we've had these wonderful sales because of the spa supporting that sale, and now we have to make the claim. And for a manufacturer, there's a certain specific way that they expect their channel partners to make that claim with them. And for a distributor has 50 different ways to file a claim with the manufacturers that they support. And then when it comes to the claim, it's one thing to make the claim, but now it's to reconcile it. So we'll talk about reconciliation of claims. And then, of course, we'll talk a little bit about the need for data analysis and some of the KPIs that might be interesting to you that you may want to reflect on. So with that, let's start with a couple questions for the audience.
I think the thing for me yesterday, obviously I was in the presentation on spas yesterday. It was very informative. What I'd be really interested to know, though, who's distributors in the room, distributors or merchants, as I would say in the UK? Can you stand up if you're a distributor for me? I'm pinching it from the chat from Travis Perkins. They seeded this yesterday incredibly well. So a few distributors in the room. And the reason I asked that, so my background's 20 years in building materials, working for the Travis Perkins Group, but for Keyline for many years, and then the Grafton Group. And I've also worked for Wavin and ACS in the manufacturing world. And I have probably a different view from the conversation yesterday. And the view being, do you know what, if you're a manufacturer, spa's wonderful. It ties you get the cash from the merchant and distributor up front. It funds my business, which it does now. It gives me all your customer data that I can then go and trade with your customers. And actually, there's very little risk for me in return. I put my distribution hat on. They're the worst thing since sliced bread, and they are without doubt a necessary evil, because unless I can understand how I can sell something without giving away too much money on the bottom line, then I'm going to keep the spas and the claim backs just to protect my profit. But let's not kid ourselves that spas for distributors will ever be a great thing. They never will be. They're a great thing for manufacturers. And I wanted just to make that point because while I'm here representing manufacturers, I've done both sides of that journey. And I think for anybody to try and square that circle, it's an almost impossible task. I think one of the takeaways that myself and Mo was talking about, actually one of the things that we'd like you to take away today is we have an opportunity with Enable to create a system that takes away some of these pinch points, some of these pains, some of the challenges that we have within the SPA process. And you have a champion in Mo that's kind of lived and breathed SPAs from a distributor point for many a year to feed that information back in and build a system and a community that actually starts to create some benefit for both parties, not having a one-sided benefit, because you do need to get to a more balanced position. For those people in the room that are distributors, I'd be really keen to understand, why do you use an SPA in your world? Don't be shy. Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. Similar to the UK, I would say, and some product ranges without doubt. So any other? Push you forced to,
Forced to.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
There's no way out.
Yeah. 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 Absolutely.
Absolutely. I think too, when it comes to this whole spa world that we're living in, claim back world that we're living in, I'm going to coin something Tammy said many, many, many years ago, and I've been in the industry for 40 plus years, so many years ago when we were on a task force together, Tammy right here, who had a comment for us, she said, you know, really we live in the PA world, not the spa world. You know, it's really price agreements more than they are special anymore. And to give you a little bit of background, and I love that saying because they really are price agreements now. They've gone rampant, you know, and we're dealing with thousands and thousands and thousands of transactions. But a little bit of history, actually these special price agreements happened in the oil and railroad times back in the late 1800s. So they've been popularized for many, many, many years. And I know in at least the electrical industry, they became popular in the 70s by the lighting companies. And, you know, I think many times you think about, you know, well, should we do spas or should we not do spas? And as we've become more complex in our pricing variabilities and everything else that we're dealing with today, the question is really real. Should we do them or not? How do we go to market without so much cost and overhead? On the other hand, how do we go to market and be as competitive as we can be and use these as our weapon to gain market share? So there's these two sides of the, you know, the argument. So they are important, they play a role. And, you know, how much of a role? Let's still talk about that as we go on today. Also, are there any manufacturers in the room? Fantastic, good. I'm glad we have a mix. All right, that's great. That's what this is all about. So, you know, just to quickly, you know, go over some of the reasons, of course, protect margins, collect the information, you know, on the end consumer, gain that market share, retain the market share, and of course, strengthen the relationship. So those things came up, which is super great. So let's just briefly go through the requesting and approving of spas. In this process, I'm kind of wondering if you were going to look at the 5 pillars we started with, requesting and approving, spa maintenance, spa claim, spa reconciliation, and then analytics. If you were looking at the requesting and approving of spas, how would you rate from 1 to 5? How would you rate the pain that's associated with this? Is it, you know, let's do it this way. I think we need to do a little bit. Would you rate it high, that it's really, really difficult for you to gather this information to make sure it's all in your business system so that you're never going to miss a claim? Is this a really high pain threshold, a medium, or a low?
Well, it varies by for us.
It varies by manufacturer.
Some are very easy to get.
When you say, is that from time-wise they're difficult, or so the speed to market? So here we have a real high pain threshold. How about anybody else? Would anybody else have a comment that would lower that pain a little bit into a medium threshold? Do you find it easy using EDI and, you know, upload and, you know, export type mechanisms? The timing from the manufacturers is really pretty good, or from your rep agencies?
Maybe we ask the question slightly different. Does anybody actually think that they're easy to do? I think we have the answer there, Mark.
Well, I think they're not easy, but in regard to response time and in regard to loading it in the systems, there is automation, and there are manufacturers who do a fabulous job turning around spas. I think when it comes to the big projects,
Yeah.
then it's probably another story, you know, so it can be a mixed bag. So let's talk about spa maintenance, a little bit about that. I'm not sure I want to talk about this one.
Can I just ask with the spa maintenance? So obviously in the UK and the world had COVID. We then experienced incredible shortages of material, certainly in the UK. I'm assuming it was similar to the US as well. And we experienced challenges of, do you know what, we're shipping material, we've accepted orders from customers, and then material coming into our sites, our locations, and we were shipping material at completely different prices and creating some real challenges. How did your businesses cope through that process? Is it still painful today?
Our spa maintenance tripled last year.
We had the unfortunate thing that we had an incredibly old computer system, like most people in the UK, a 30, 40-year-old system where we manually had to change every single ticket that had ever been booked out. We had no ability, and this is a $3.5 billion UK turnover organisation running a system where we physically had to change every single ticket that had been booked out manually. So that the cost of change for that organisation was immense. The loss of profit for the organisation was immense. The benefit for the manufacturer was probably relatively strong. Although I would imagine that Keystone, who's one of our biggest suppliers in that business, would have a different viewpoint. But certainly, it was the cost of change and the maintenance of that became a really cumbersome approach. And whilst we used our ERP system to raise the claim, the manual checking at the back end from the spreadsheet was very time consuming. So I think the maintenance piece, which is the kind of the forgotten part of the SPA, is becoming a bigger challenge, because whilst price inflation seems to have settled slightly in the UK, we're still doing 3-4 times the amount of increases that we would have had in a traditional period. And we probably have the factor of deflation coming at some point, which creates a slightly more scary proposition for the SPA world. While we're having material inflation and we're getting stock gains, we're okay. The second we start to have price deflation on some items, which I think will come certainly in the steel world, becomes a challenge for managing that process.
Absolutely. One other thing I think about is who's making those changes. I think that when there are price changes and there are these, fluctuations and inflation of pricing that we're dealing with, who's making those changes is really an important question to look at. Is someone who's actually analyzing pricing and making sure that those price changes are going to be, of course, viable in the markets that you have, but also the fact that when you start looking at some of this, are some of these spas even being used? And you're maintaining on contracts that haven't even been touched, you really haven't even won the business, and yet you have thousands and thousands and thousands of contracts out there. It's really hard to be able to say that every single spa that's in the system is going to be acted upon, because it's at the quoting stage. That's why you need the quote, from a spa in the first place for quoting purposes. So just throwing things out there that, leads to the next thing.
Absolutely. I think from a manufacturing perspective, it's probably one of the biggest frustrations, because we still produce most of the spas in paper form, PDFs that we have to create to maintain all that information, and there's no revenue going through. But then when you try to take away a spa from somebody and say, well, you're not transacting it. Oh, no, we're working on it. 12 months later, they're still working on it and getting nothing. So it creates a load of administration for ourselves as well as indeed the merchant chain.
Absolutely. So we just wanted to touch on that a little bit. I think some of these things that we're bringing up is very intentional when it comes to Enable's roadmap into a solution. The comments that you make and the things that we hear are the things that help us develop a very relative product. So we're really interested in your comments here, and that's why we're bringing these things up. How about making the claims? All right, here we go. Where are we going to start with making the claims? I think there's areas of the spa that are very important that we talk about, and it's like, who's in control of the entire spa process? You know that there's many hands in it, and generally, you have a process that, you get through. It's a lot of people, it's a lot of data to manage, you get through the process, and then we come to this claim session, or this section of the process. And I think about the claims are the area that I think are of most interest right now to Enable, and it should be of most interest, especially if you're a distributor, we're going to go through some things. But when you look at the terms and conditions, many times, depending on who procures the spa in the first place, the terms and condition on the claim side is completely ignored by the sales team. They're oblivious to that. And all of a sudden, finance is over here doing the claim, and it's like, oh, you can only claim within 30 days. Oh, you have to use this cost basis. There's things that are within the T's and C's of every single spa by every single manufacturer that if that is not well documented in the setup of the spa in the first place, the claim will be disputed. So one of the things that we're trying to do is, of course, be able to handle the terms and conditions as it is spelled out in a spa from a manufacturer and make sure that that is, recognized and that it is followed. So we're trying to, again, find ways where we can reduce the friction. So that's one thing. The terms and conditions are truly important when it comes to this claim process.
Without doubt.
And I think the other thing with the claim, I'm just going to mention 3 things. The second thing I wanted to mention is your profitability. That's where you're really finding out what your net profit is and who in your company are managing claims based on a lower cost at what margin. You've seen so many times that if it's a spa, the margin is this much.
I think
right?
with claimbacks, and again in the UK, if you're selling on a claimback situation, a spa situation, your margin tends to be the lowest you would sell in your organisation. It's always below our gross margin position, our average gross margin. So instantly you've got this position where, yes, it's a volume generator, so if you can get your load values, great. But you've got this position where you have a labour-intensive process, a lot of risk to your cash flow position for what is a margin-diluting transaction in reality into the business. So the way of making that claim smoother, and some organisations, by the way, they pay every claim that you issue. There's other organisations, like Keystone would pay most of our claims. They're always excellent, I've got to say. She's in the room, so they're always superb. But others will find every reason under the sun not to pay that position. And Mark, who's from Enable, was the Central Finance Director at Grafton Group, of which my business was part of. And we would have running arguments and debates about where's my claim back money, where's my rebate money, why is my business that I think is going to make this amount of money this month disappearing because Mark at Central Finance has messed it up. Now, it wasn't Mark at Central Finance, it was actually my front-end operators who were messing it up. And the manufacturers were taking advantage of that incredible loophole in all the T's and C's. And I think that's one of the conversations that Enable's having at the moment is about this development of that software, about is there a need to have line-level detail on claimbacks? For those in the merchant and manufacturing world, do you believe you should have line-level detail when you're submitting a claim, so product level, order level, to be able to get the money? Just can I have a show of hands who thinks you need the line-level detail when making a claim?
Got to have it.
The site, all sorts, loads of information. And I think that's there's this tendency we've seen, certainly in some UK manufacturers, where we want to just give us a lump sum, we'll give you the detail back with nothing, we'll just reject 50 grand and not give you the detail. And in my merchant mind, that was straight away the red flag to say, actually, I want that 50 grand. Whether I'm entitled to that 50 grand or not, I'm going to find a way to get that 50 grand back in my back pocket rather than it being in the manufacturer's back pocket. And we would always talk about this. So we were joking about it the other day, about this kind of this mutually beneficial relationship. My job is to make my business money. The manufacturer's job is to make their business as much money as possible. And if in the middle you can find a way of working it together to make both businesses money, then great. But the reality is, in merchanting, in distribution, we might have had one supplier of that product range. A manufacturer will always have 10 or 11 unless you've got an exclusive trading agreement. So it's always in my benefit to find the area where I can sell as a manufacturer to the most profitable area and distributor I can possibly find. So the kind of the relationship of this warm, fuzzy feeling that we like to talk about of everybody in it together, I think it's a little bit of a misnomer in my view. Maybe I'm a cynical Brit, maybe.
But I do think the capital side of these spas is the one most important thing that we should recognize this as a distributor, because by the way, we're financing these upfront. Every single rebate agreement we have is financed upfront by a distributor, and manufacturers can use that cash until we claim it back as a distributor. So I think the claim side of it and the management of cash flow and that capital of that's not available to the distributor until you get it back is the number one thing that we're trying to do here. How can we increase that cash flow? How can we bring that cash flow? Usually it's on a monthly claim basis, very common monthly. Why?
I think COVID definitely, certainly in the UK, put spas under a greater scrutiny. So when we shut our organisation down for 2 months, we had no revenue coming in, so we started to auto-deduct. We probably didn't tell the suppliers in the most proactive of manners, but we'd started to deduct our rebate and deduct our claim back monies. And actually it flagged up to us. And you'd say actually a business of our scale should have understood how much of our business was tied up in cash flow, but we didn't. It wasn't, when things were going great, do you know what? Cash flow, we looked at what customers were paying us and what we were paying out. We didn't go through the nth degree of understanding where our money was sat and where it was tied up, because we weren't bothered. The business had enough cash. It was running relatively well. The position was strong. And then COVID came and actually put everything into focus about where was our money tied, where was our cash sat, and actually we want our money back. So I think it's kept that focus on spas in general, certainly in my country, about actually the risk is all sat with the distributor and the benefit currently sits all with the manufacturer. Yes, it creates some opportunities to grow volume, and for me as a manufacturer, it allows me to distribute my product nationally. When I say nationally in the UK, we're the equivalent of Florida. So it's not the same challenge, I would suggest, but it allows me to do national deals and have a distribution partner wherever in the country to ship my material. But that said, it's more of a challenge. We understand that for our customer base, it becomes a challenge for them to finance that position.
Absolutely. And we had a question. Dan?
I think claimbacks as a position for both the manufacturing part and indeed a distributor part are a damaging transaction anyway. I think it creates a lot of conflict. I think it creates a lot of distraction. And I think it's a challenge for both parties. The manufacturer naturally believes that, in my head, we believe that you're ripping us off. You're putting claims through that are incorrect. And the merchant naturally believes the manufacturer's trying every way possible not to pay a claim back. And the reality is I don't believe any of those points. I think it's just our natural positions, isn't it? We naturally think that someone's trying to have one over on us. So I think the position on the line detail, for me, I ran a very low returning business. It was a 2.5% returning distribution business, very specialised in the UK, niche market, turned over 300 million. We had to work incredibly hard for our profit to make 2.5%. We take all the credit risk. So that £50,000 to us was worth a hell of a lot of revenue. So we would have gone through every line detail and tried to claim that. But again, that threw it more into perspective after COVID, when we were looking at every aspect of our business to get our money in. And again, in hindsight, we should have been doing that all the time, but we didn't have the data or the systems to do that. We used spreadsheets for everything, and Mark will know that the king of the massive spreadsheet that would break every now and again. It made the business very, very hard to run in that detail.
We actually did a little bit of research to find out how companies are managing spas, and you can see here that many companies are using an ERP system to do most of the process for spas. They rely on that, and then you can see the next biggest band are spreadsheets. That's scary that things are on spreadsheets. So with Enable, we say we want to take that spreadsheet experience away. We want to get that into a solution so you don't have someone working on a spreadsheet. You have someone working on a solution that is not only accessed by those who do the claims, but also those that have to look at all the analytics behind the data of all these transactions that we have, and eventually the collaboration of requesting and approving. Right from the beginning to the end, our intention at Enable is to come up with this process. It's going to take time. It's going to take versioning, but we need help for those that, and we thank Tammy, you're here, I know we had another company here, Steiner Electric. They're actually on an SPA board for us, advisory board. Super helpful in helping us learn how we need to make this process fluid from beginning to end, not for distributors only, for manufacturers as well. It's been really great input, and we're so grateful for that. I think here we want to start talking about the reconciliation. We got into a little bit of this tension and friction that's involved in these relationships with manufacturers and distributors. And you know, the thing we really don't want is having a relationship that has a lot of friction in it. Of course, we want to do all we can to reduce that. And so much of the friction becomes relevant and real when it comes to the reconciliation of a claim. You know, there's a lot of instant distrust. Why is the distributor claiming way over than what they ever purchased from us? And, you know, they're trying to get more money out of us than you know, they should be claiming. And on the other hand, the manufacturers are, you know, claiming with different cost bases than what the, you know, distributor is having. So we have just a lot of cleanup here, a lot of understanding and unity that we need to bring together with a tool that will really reduce this friction. So, you know, the reconciliation of the claim is one of those areas that it's interesting to talk about. So, Gareth, you mentioned that you would do an automatic debit.
Yep.
On the distributor side.
Yep.
There's two ways to really go about that, right? You can have a system that would raise an automatic credit or debit memo depending on if you're a manufacturer or distributor. But, you know, in my days, if we were to automatic debit, that wasn't part of the terms and conditions. And nor did anyone else in the company, including myself, go and negotiate that with the manufacturer so that there's this understanding. We're doing this amount of business from you. You're going to have to trust us. We're going to take an automatic debit, and then we're going to do our best we can to try to make it right for one another. Very hard, because who swallows the loss? Someone's going to get hit. And how do you share that? So I wanted to just open that up in regard for waiting for the credit and looking at the disputes, or, you know, and trying to reconcile those together, resubmitting those claims versus taking an automatic debit and reconciling later. What was that like?
Yeah, I think we took a different approach to different suppliers and different customers. So, so Keystone, that used to do it very efficiently, tend to pay relatively quickly. We would have a different approach to the supplier that was more of a transactional relationship, where actually they don't promote us. We don't really promote them. We have to deal with them because it's the market that we operate within. So we took a different approaches with different suppliers. As I say, I think COVID was a game changer. It changed our attitude to, certainly changed our attitude to the way that we interacted with supply chain. We had a saying in our business, which was, we're fiercely loyal, but we're fiercely demanding. We're always firm and fair. So when COVID came along and our business is shut down and we're having debates with people about rebate agreements, volumetric rebates, where, do you know what, we're shut for 2 months, we're not going to hit that number, so you're going to take all this profit out of our business. That's not a great relationship. And the supply chain, manufacturing, including the business that I run, took this moral high ground. We have a trading agreement. Fast forward 12 months with price inflation and material challenges, they ripped up the entire trading agreements. They put price increases through with no notice periods. They completely revalued and were destroying the distribution sector. Now, they weren't doing it on purpose, but what was good for the goose 12 months earlier should have been good for the gander another 12 months later. So we took a viewpoint that actually, do you know what, all bets are off, because the manufacturing, of which I'm now with, absolutely ignored their trading commitments. At that point, they ignored their service level agreements, they ignored their trading agreements. So actually, we thought it was fair game to then choose to ignore the bits that we wanted to ignore, the bits that give us cash flow back into our business, that helps our return on capital employed. So we took a very dim view, maybe rightly or wrongly, with those suppliers that we had a transactional relationship with. If it was a good working relationship, one that we valued, then of course we took a different view, because you want to have a longer term relationship. You can't cut your nose off to spite your face, can you, in business? It comes back to haunt you in the good times. But there's certainly supply chain where absolutely, does it make a difference if we treat them in this way or treat them in another way. And like I say, from a manufacturing perspective, we would choose the people that we wanted to deal with. The organisation that I work for now, we have a view that we back the horse that we want to back. We don't run with every man and his dog. We pick the partners that we want to work with, and we support them royally. When I worked for the Hepworth Group, which became Wavin, you might know Wavin in the US, we had our strategic partners that the Travis Perkins Group, when you were there, would have been one that you would never do anything too negatively with, because it was 50% of your UK revenue at the time. So you took a different view depending on the customer or the distributor or the partner that you want to trade with. But it became important to take that different view. So.
It is. And working that out together, which is so great. So if you've ever dealt with a spa dispute, stand up.
Well, I'm going to stand up. Everybody's dealt with a spa review. Come on, if you're in a distributor or a manufacturer.
Yeah. There's a lot of them, and one of the things that, we know that there is this dispute world when it comes to spas, and part of the roadmap for our solution at Enable is to be able to bring those disputes to light as quick as possible. Again, this is going to take time to build when I say these things, but we are really trying to paint a beautiful world as best we can within spas, and it will take some time. But we do know that this is a point of contention, and the amount of time that it takes back to not only reconcile the dispute, but to go back to the beginning of the transactions. What were the terms of it? Who did it? What were the prices? How was it updated right when there was a price? It just can go on and on and on and on. And then it's not only resolving that dispute, it's resolving the transactions that are in the pipeline, that these issues will come up again because that spa was used on these orders that haven't shipped yet. So not only do you have the dispute today here, you also probably have it in the future with many of these spas. So I think that, just listening and hearing some of these things are the items that we want to be able to embed into the solution one day.
And I think that's where Enable wants the feedback from both the distributor and the manufacturer about how we can work together and smooth some of these challenges. I don't think there's a merchant chain or distributor in the UK that at some point hasn't had a margin task force trying to find where their profit's gone. Certainly the Travis Perkins Group had a massive margin task force looking for millions of pounds. We at the Grafton Group spent many occasions trying to find out where our money's disappeared, whether it was rebate or SPAs. So to get to a point where we could automate most of that process and transaction, I think it's critical in that journey of businesses. I don't know about you guys and girls, but do you know what you don't want to have a lot of people sat in administration roles in a business? They're not productive. You either make something or you sell something in our world. And actually, the more that you have in admin, it's a cost that isn't a productive cost. It's a necessary cost. So we can get to a position where we can strip out that cost and redeploy that either into the profit line or into frontline service provision to improve our customer experience, our customer journey, then absolutely we should be engaging with systems and organisations that can facilitate that development. And obviously the work that Enable's doing in that SPA world is something that I think we all would be grateful to have a solution that actually works for mass, not for one-off suppliers or one-off situations. It works for the mass market.
Absolutely. So with that said, I think we have just about 6 minutes left. I want to be sure that when it comes to the claims and the disputes, of course, we open up that communication. We open up process inefficiencies that we need to correct during that dispute process too. I mean, you really drill into some of these things. And also trying to minimize these human errors that go with them. But one of the things that I want to touch on before we're done here, Gareth, is talking about some of these critical KPIs and the measurements that are very interesting, that give you actionability to get to a point in your lives and your relationships, to get to the point where you're doing smart spas. When are they smart? When are they needed? How do we determine that with your trading partners? We need to get to the point where we've got some ideas that we can drill into the claim data that's going to lead you to some of this information that we have here that we've listed. So when you look at the product that's on your shelf by a supplier that you need to do spas with, the difference between your into-stock cost and what you claim on average is your premium. So and then if you break that premium down by your velocity codes, your ABC classifications, I think it's interesting to look at that data. I used to study it all the time because I find it very interesting that that information told me that we're not negotiating enough on the purchasing side. And we're causing an awful lot of transactions where we have penny claims, silly claims. Why are we even doing that? Why don't we just perfect the cost on the shelf and let's take away some of this overhead? Those are silly claims to me. So I think, when we look at the premiums, and then dive deeper into the velocity codes, I think that would be really helpful. You want to maybe take the next one, Gareth, on the gross margin?
Yeah, look, so for a gross margin challenge, there's the old saying, isn't it, what gets measured gets done. For us, in certainly the organisations I've been involved with, the claim back information for us, the data was just appalling. So for us to actually understand the impact on our gross margin position was a real challenge on a day-to-day transaction basis. So our salespeople, and I was lucky enough to manage the sales team as well, so not just a head office function that doesn't speak to customers. They were a challenge. They struggled to understand the profitability of an agreement, the waterfall effect that if you increase the discount or the manufacturer increases the discount, it reduces the amount of the claim back monies that you're getting back in. So does that customer all of a sudden become a profitable customer to us, or is it not? And actually, could we be investing in our resource-constrained business? Could we invest in our people in different customers to trade with? As I said earlier in the discussion, for us, claim back business or SPA business was lower margin business than our core revenue lines. So it was so important to make sure that we understood, are we making some profit? Are we just filling up our wagons with revenue that isn't delivering to the bottom line? Again, I say for a manufacturer, it's great for us. We know what margin we're going to be paying you. We know that if actually we need to increase our discount, you're going to take the pain as a distributor by a reduced margin. So actually I can be the king going in and seeing a customer and giving a discount that actually I'm not actually paying for. You're paying for it as a distributor. So it works for me incredibly well, but for the merchant, the distribution partner, it becomes a real challenge to the profitability of your organisation. And again, how we make that work between that manufacturing partner and distribution partner at the gross profit level, not pound notes level, because manufacturers, Derek McFarlane will be the king of, well, you make more pound notes every time there's a price increase. No, it's about percentage margins that we're interested in, not pound notes. Pound notes is great, but it's percentage margins. And I think we can get to a point of understanding the data better in a timely manner by customer group and customer position. And depot location as well, I may add. I think that gets us into a far better position.
I think, really looking at and slicing the data in certain ways so you can understand your margin and what's happening with spas as it relates to your through stock sales. Yeah. Really understanding what that is and what's happening. Now, I did speak to one distributor who their spa margin is better than their through stock. So that tells me they probably sell a lot of commodities, and those are always at larger margins, so there's a mix in there. But anyway, I think these are just topics that we should talk about. One other topic of interest here is the overhead expense that's related to managing spas. There is a calculator that's available that we can have available to you that will help your company manage the overhead and bring to light the overhead expense that's related to spas. So I remember back in my day when I used to go into businesses and I would consult on spas, I remember we had 2 sessions, and real quickly there was the sales session that we talked about spas and what that was like, and we went through a workshop and brought to light what the calculator was showing for overhead expense. And then we also had a admin, purchasing, CEO, president session where they actually put in the numbers in the calculator to determine how much their overhead expense was associated to spas. When we expressed the overhead percentage to the sales department, which was like 300 basis points, you should have seen the faces on the sales side. They had no idea that they had to make up that margin. They had no idea. So every time they go to try to chase a spa, add another 3%. So it's things like this that doesn't get talked about a whole lot, but there are some tools available. With that, I think, you can notice we've got a couple other things. We have 10 seconds left here. And Gareth, I want to thank you for joining us here at Enable and talking to us about this. And please know we're here for questions. And I thank you for joining us today.
No, thank you.
Great job.